and welcome to the National World War II Museum's podcast series, Service on Celluloid. This podcast is brought to you through the generous support of the Albert and Ethel Hertzstein Charitable Foundation. Each week, our in-house experts sit down with special guests to discuss depictions of World War II on film. Sit back and get ready for a lively debate that will reveal the good and bad of how Hollywood shows the 20th century's most dramatic event. My name is Seth Paradin, historian and digital content manager here at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans. And today our special guests are Dave Walker, social media specialist here at the museum.
Podcast. I came for the waters.
Good, Dave.
Colin Makehamson, assistant director of education for curriculum here at the museum.
I'm not topping that. Hi.
And Dr. Rob Citino, senior historian and executive director of the Institute for the Study of War and Democracy.
I stick my neck out for nobody.
No, you don't. Today, we will be discussing the 1942 classic Casablanca. The film centers on an American expatriate who owns a popular nightclub in French Morocco in 1942. The nightclub is a hotbed of spies, informants, and refugees fleeing Nazi-occupied Europe. The nightclub owner faces a critical personal dilemma in that he must choose to either help or ignore his old flame and her refugee husband as they attempt to escape Nazi imprisonment. Casablanca features a virtual galaxy of 1940s Warner Brothers stars, including Humphrey Bogart as the club owner Rick Blaine, Ingrid Bergman as his lost love Ilsa Lund, Paul Enried as Victor Laszlo, Ilsa's husband, Peter Lorre as in Claude Rains and Sidney Greenstreet. The film was directed by Michael Curtiz and was written by Julius Epstein, Philip Epstein, and Howard Koch, based on a stage play called Everybody Comes to Rick's. It was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, winning 3, including Outstanding Motion Picture, Best Director, and Best Writing Screenplay. Casablanca consistently appears in the top 5 of AFI's 100 Greatest American Films. The Writers Guild has named it the greatest screenplay of all time, and I don't think that's debatable, really. So anyway, this is going to be kind of different in that, this is a purely fictional story. So I'm going to ask the question, how accurate is it? But we're going to kind of focus on specific things within the story about accuracy. One of the things that I want to ask you guys, we'll ask the panel here, is how accurate is the refugee story and the route shown, including the coveted letters of transit? And Colin, I'll start with you.
Sure. The letters of transit in the film, as it exists in Casablanca, is that classic MacGuffin device. They're not real insofar as they exist in the real world, but in Casablanca, they're the plot motivator that moves the plot along. But certainly, the desire to secure entry and exit visas to get out of Nazi-occupied Europe was a very real motivation for not only civilians at the time, but also some of the actors in our cast of wanting to escape of Europe as quickly as possible, making their way to neutral Portugal and hopefully over the waters of the Atlantic. But the papers themselves, don't exist, but they're a great plot device. Sort of like the 39 Steps or the Maltese Falcon is something just to move the plot along.
Another good movie. How about you, Dave? What's your opinion?
Meredith Hindley, an author who wrote a really definitive book about the true Casablanca in North Africa, did a presentation at the museum in January of last year. It's on YouTube. You can Google it, World War II and her name, or Casablanca. And she does like a 30-minute presentation where she talks about the accuracies and inaccuracies. She made a few quibbles, but she said, on the whole, I think her exact quote in the book was, the morality play that unfolds perfectly captures the real choices that real people faced in Casablanca. If it fudged or hedged on a couple of things, the airport would have been 5 miles from Rick's, for example, things like that, things she pointed out. So I think her conclusion that the spirit of it, the melodrama of it, is accurate to what people would have experienced in Casablanca.
As a historian, I have to completely reject that argument 100%. I mean, that's a slippery slope. It evoked the feel of Casablanca. So I understand. I think Colin and Dave, you're both right. I like this as a kind of a plot device. It's a MacGuffin. But the notion that the Nazis would conquer a continent and attempt to exterminate whole peoples, but wouldn't put a hit on Victor Laszlo because he happens to be holding the correct papers. Again, you don't have a movie. If you have the real Nazis, we can talk about the portrayal of Vichy France or the Vichy colonies as well. But if you really have the Nazis and they're out to get a guy, then they could have done something about it no matter what kind of papers he's carrying. But, I thought, having said that, I'll agree with you, Dave. I think that it sets up nicely. It sets up nicely so that Rick can be confronted with this dilemma, this horrible dilemma, this choice that he has to make.
I agree. And then, there has to be something to strive to get or achieve. And obviously they want to achieve getting the hell out of Europe. And in order to do that, they got to have those papers. But everybody's right here at their table. There was no such thing as letters of transit that would get you safely out of Nazi-occupied Europe if, nobody was going to get out of Nazi-occupied Europe if the Germans didn't want you to go. And that's just how it was. The route of departure, or the refugee route, I think it's a little off. Mm-hmm. There weren't too many refugees going through French Morocco in 1942 that were coming from mainland Europe. Paris back in 1939 and 40, yeah. London, sure. Even Prague, yeah. Back, before the war began, sure. But French Morocco, no.
And I think being smuggled down across Mediterranean is more difficult. Probably smuggled across the Pyrenees, across Spain, and then still Lisbon, if that happens to be your destination. These people are kind of hopeless. They all say we're going to be stuck here in Casablanca forever. And that is the plight of the refugee. If you're fleeing Nazi Germany or any form of oppression globally today, that's that hopeless sense. Today is going to be pretty much like tomorrow, which is pretty much like the day after tomorrow. And at the end of the day, I'm probably going to die in this city. And so many people say that in the film. And again, I thought that was evocative to me, Dave.
The waiting.
Yeah. I think something too that is a little, well, it's not a little, it's a lot. It's very dramatic, melodramatic, if you will, is the amount of refugees in that location at that time. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but the high point of refugees leaving Europe was the mid to late 30s. It was not 1942. The door had been closed by 1942, and there were. I don't see there being that many people in one spot at one time trying to get the hell out of Europe in 1942. Again, if there's something different that I don't know.
There's a great term that's after the Battle of France in 1940. This French term for exodus, exode, of the inhabitants of French cities just sort of scattering, of trying to get as far south away from the Nazis as possible, and then people from rural areas going to the cities and thinking they can find safety or an abundance of resources and protection and not finding anything. So if not the actual refugee route, certainly the confusion of people trying to find any safe haven to go or any place they can squirrel away with some degree of safety or security, perhaps that, would be reflected in Casablanca's, sequence of these people trying to find safety in this, desert scape.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned, Rob, were you going to say something?
Oh, nope.
Okay. You mentioned Vichy France. It plays a role throughout this movie. And another movie that Bogey's in, too, is To Have and Have Not, which is a fantastic movie written by Hemingway. But let's discuss the regime and how it's depicted versus reality.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll lead off with this one, and then everybody can disagree with me if you like. Well, that's where the film is completely unrealistic. Claude Rains is kind of a almost gleefully amoral character, Captain Renault, that everyone he's an appealing character. Everyone kind of loves him in the film, and at the end, he regains a bit of his moral compass. I mean, that is not a representation of Vichy or Vichy officialdom, which was a horrible regime which threw its own people in concentration camps, willingly rounded up Jews in the metropole and in the French colonies and shipped them off to German extermination camps. I'd hate for anyone to come out of Casablanca thinking that Vichy was kind of friendly. And in the way, we love, what's the greatest quote from this film? Well, you're closing me down on what pretext? And Renault says, I'm shocked to see that there's gambling going on here, Rick. We all laugh at that. He sort of looks the other way. I blow with the wind, and right now the wind's blowing from Vichy, as he said. You can identify with this character caught in a very difficult time. But again, I think that's a really bogus, and I think, I hate this phrase, recent research has shown, like anyone gives a hoot. But there's been so many books now, so much research done on the Vichy regime, and it's like a minor league Nazis.
Yep.
Nazis without the global threat, but all the horrible internal repression. And, when we will invade North Africa in November 1942, we're first going to try to cooperate with the Vichy regime. And that put us in the position of whether or not we were going to enforce anti-Semitic legislation that was already on the books. And thankfully, most Americans said no. So I've had my say. Mic drop. I'm out.
Well, I was going to follow up with that with you, if you don't mind,
Sure.
Because there was that sort of tender relationship between America, between the Allies and Vichy France. What was that exactly? I mean, why? Because it was, you know what I'm saying? I'm fumbling a little bit here, but I'm
No, I'm just without reverting into lecture mode, Dave. I would just say this, that we wanted to play ball with Vichy because it would be easier to occupy North Africa if we had the local officialdom on our side. I don't think it was any kind of necessarily tender, affectionate, or sentimental romance, but it would be easier to govern the place. But the American people got wind of some deals we were making with Vichy officials soon after Operation Torch, and there was a firestorm of criticism. Edward R. Murrow, are we killing Nazis or sleeping with them, or something? I'm paraphrasing, with something along those lines. That kind of came to an end when one of the officials we were talking with was assassinated by a young man. And so that came to an end very soon. And I think it set a tone that one thing the Allies were not going to be doing was negotiating or attempting some kind of modus vivendi with the fascist authorities in countries that they liberated. So that's, again, I just gave you an interesting 3-minute lecture on Vichy that no one will ever immortalize as one of the 10 great speeches of all time, in the way that they say that Casablanca is one of the 10 best films of all time.
No, but thanks.
And one thing you certainly don't get either is just the French right in the late 19th and early 20th century is a weird confluence of anti-Dreyfusards and monarchists and clerics and integralists, and you really don't get a sense of what Vichy is other than just sort of a stand-in for, they're the Nazi stooge, and not a very threatening one, just sort of more sort of a Hogan's Heroes type, camp guard, as opposed to the menace of the Nazis in Schindler's List or something.
Well, it's set up in the movie. In my opinion, they depict Vichy as it's a puppet state, which not really. I mean, in reality, at least in 1940, a great majority of the French in southern France and anything that wasn't occupied by Nazi Germany, they were in favor of them. They liked them, at least for a while.
Former war hero at the head.
Yeah, Marshal Pétain.
Pétain, right? And you see that sign at the beginning, that poster in which he says, "I keep my promises, and I keep other people's promises too." He was saying the resistance fighters are going to get us all killed by the Germans. We promise not to give them any trouble, and every time they blow something up, we're going to be, or anytime they kill a German courier. I think that's kind of the plot device at the beginning, isn't it? But again, this is a fascist regime. I agree with Colin. There's a kind of a crazy confluence of forces, but they were all united in one thing. They hated democracy. They're pretty much all anti-Semitic. Maybe that was the glue that held Vichy together, and that's hardly talked about at all here.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because that was, if you weren't, I was going to. And Vichy France was very anti-Semitic. Not anywhere near the level of the Nazis, but I mean, like you said, they deported their own Jews long before the Germans told them to do so.
Yes, and they were enthusiastic about it. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they laid the blame for the defeat in 1940 at the feet of Jews and socialists and communists.
Just like the Germans did in 1918.
Does that sound familiar?
Round up the usual suspects. And that's that. That fascists are always rounding up the usual suspects. And pacifists, liberals, socialists, Jews, and players to be named later. It's always the same list.
Anybody that doesn't fit their ideal. Rick's American Cafe, or Café Américain in the film.
There's a real one in Casablanca today.
Is there really?
Yeah, opened it up obviously based on the film. There is a
Yeah.
Rick's American Cafe. I sense a bit of educational travel coming on here at the museum.
I'd be
It'd
fine
be a
with
good
that.
paper article of just where places that Rick's Cafes used to be. I think there was one in Gretna in the West Bank, I think in the 70s and 80s. So where these things were dotted around the United States, I'm sure it's a great franchise idea.
I love the city.
So let's talk about Rick's Cafe as a metaphor for the U.S. at that time. Rob, I know this was one of the things that you wanted to talk about, so I'm going to let loose the dogs here.
Yeah, sure, thanks. I mean, this struck me as I was watching it. I've watched this film 1,000 times. I think we probably all have around this table. I was debating whether to watch it again. I can sort of replay it in my mind. It's like, the song Sunshine of Your Love or something. I don't need to really hear it. I can replay it in my mind. But I watched it again, and it really struck me about what the cafe is. And it's a metaphor. Rick is an American. He's not really into the fight. He doesn't really think much about the great struggle. He's looking out for number one. He's got his own domestic, personal issues. He's still suffering. He was once maybe an idealist. He like Dave Walker, he ran guns to the Ethiopians in 1935.
It was for Haile Selassie, man.
So who wouldn't do that?
Who wouldn't?
And he fought on the loyalist side in the Spanish Civil War. So he obviously had an idealistic string at some point. But he's a cynic. He's world weary. He just doesn't care. And Rick's, in a sense, is maybe the one place in the world where you can still go and forget about World War II. The Nazis are there and the French are there, and it seems like everybody's there. And
everybody comes to Rick's.
Everybody comes to Rick's, and they're drinking nonstop. I mean, that's the if you look at this, the choreography of this film is a series of like table hopping. Oh, please sit down. Yes, we will. Have a drink. Yes, we will. Oh, please sit down. Have you met? Yes, please sit down. And so it's sort of a table hopping. You can't leave this place. You're trapped there. Another metaphor comes to mind: Hotel California. Right? You can't check out of Rick's American Cafe. But this to me was maybe the most interesting thing. It was this. It's the state of mind of America. The movie came out after Pearl Harbor. But the movie takes place before Pearl Harbor. I think I'm correct about
You are.
Right?
Because Rick at one point writes down a date, and it's December 6th, 1941.
Oh, anyway, okay, good. Yeah. I sense that, that it was before Pearl Harbor. But it's a place where you can forget about the war, and maybe that's why it's unreal. Americans are about to know all too much about this war, and there's not going to be a place where you can really leave World War II behind.
At least not for the next 4.5 years.
And 50 million dead. I mean, in a virtual apocalypse.
Yeah, I never really thought about it until I read this talking point that you came up with.
Thank you, Seth.
And it's actually I think it's very, very accurate for the time in which the movie was made. And you're 100% right. I mean, the United States wanted nothing to do with the war. I mean, Roosevelt did, let's be honest. He was supplying Great Britain, and he was getting this country prepared for war. But the American people, by and large, until Pearl Harbor, as we know well here, because we built Arsenal of Democracy, the exhibit, we didn't want to get into another European entanglement, as they said at that time. And I think that's very clear with Rick's, is that, he didn't, as he says, like you said here numerous times, he sticks his neck out for no one, and we weren't going to do the same thing as a country.
Yes,
although we kind of were.
Our national motto at the time.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Not going to stick out our neck for anyone. I'm always nervous about applying metaphorical or allegorical interpretations of film, because you're kind of geeking out. When I was a kid, I used to read Lord of the Rings all the time, like once a year. So I probably read Lord of the Rings 30 times. And it's got all kinds of allegorical aspects to it you can read in. But Tolkien once, author, gave an interview. He said, why would anyone want to write a 1,500-page allegory? It's a story for the story's sake. That's what Tolkien was saying at the time, and you can argue with him if you wish. But I'm always worried. That's why I have a little trepidation when I run this one by. I want to see what my colleagues think. Is Rick's American Cafe a metaphor?
Yeah, I mean, there's just the one line of dialogue when Rick asks, Sam, it's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in America? And his answer, probably not meaning so, is say, they're asleep. But sort of a double meaning of saying that they're not yet in the fight. It's a coming storm, but it hasn't reached their shores yet. So whether that's intentional or just sort of, Rick's getting drunk by himself and wants to know what's happening back in his hometown in New York City, where he can't go back to for unnamed reasons. I don't really know, but it's what always struck me, that little line of saying, what's going to motivate America to get involved.
I'd like to think you killed a man. That's the romantic in me.
That's what I thought too.
He didn't just support the Ethiopians; he ran guns to them. So my guess is maybe a violation of some sort of neutrality act or international gun running, or one of those statutes.
Let's really dork out. So if he was fighting in Spain, he was with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade.
Could well have been.
Very well could.
So that would have been, in big trouble in the 50s, because you could be identified as a communist. The McCarthy era. But I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess we will never know. We can all fancy fantasize about why Rick can't go back to his hometown of, I will say, Cleveland, Ohio, which is mine.
I think one of the appeals of the film is that it does rise to the level of all that interpretation, that you can, I think, with a straight face, think and talk about it metaphorically. And I think a lot of it's, clearly a lot of it's very intentional. They're asleep in America, the Epsteins and the other writers. And even back to the play, some of those thematic things were very much intentional. The play was written by a high school English teacher and a collaborator. And after a trip to Vienna, occupied Vienna, and he said it was indescribable horror, a city of marching feet. And he immediately vowed that no one could be neutral, that no one could stay. So it was written in the summer of 40. The treatment actually arrived the day after Pearl Harbor at Warner Brothers. And by then, clearly, no one could be neutral.
Was the film rushed out to take advantage of the landing?
In fact, it was. It was supposed to be released in January of the next year, but they rushed it out for a Thanksgiving.
That would have even been better. That's when the Casablanca conference took place in January of 43.
Well, just a little side note here. It premiered in November of 1942 to coincide with the landings, yet it opened to the public in January of 43 with
amazing.
the Casablanca conference.
It was just in one theater from Thanksgiving through January, then wide release. So Casablanca was in newspaper headlines as the film was being aired across the country.
Like the China syndrome being brought out at the precise moment that 3 Mile Island was experiencing a meltdown.
Those studio marketing people are great.
They are on target, man.
Well, Casablanca is a film about the need for moral clarity, if you will. And that's why it's so perfectly set in Vichy, France, or a Vichy French colony, I should say, a shadowy place where they under the authority of a completely amoral character, like you already talked about, Captain Renault. Let's talk about that. Rob,
okay. I'm seated. No one knows this listening. I'm seated at Seth's right hand, and I think that's why I'm going first all the time. No, I think we look at Renault. We look at Rick. Rick was some form of idealist. We know that he was a man of action too. He acted on his ideals. But now he's adrift. I mean, how does he deal with the problem in his life? He gets out a bottle of scotch and goes through half of it in a single night.
It's his nationality.
It's exactly right.
He's a drunkard.
He's a drunkard. He even says so. But this is a place. I like Vichy France as the setting here. I've had my say about it already, but I like it as the setting. What most Americans do, it's a kind of a armpit of the world somewhere over there, not in France, but it's got French language and French culture. But now it's under some form of Nazi tyranny, or at least allied with the Nazis. It's tough to pin exactly what Vichy France is at the time to most American moviegoers. And then you have Renault, who embodies it. He just doesn't believe in anything. He would kill his own mother if he thought it would advance his career or keep him from being arrested or in any way benefit him. We see that. People are shot. And at the very beginning, some guy running away and he's shot. It's not. So I really respect that in the filmmakers, but I think that what we're looking at here is Humphrey Bogart, Rick was it Rick Blaine? Mm-hmm. Rick's advance towards some form of moral clarity. Like that haze has to lift, just as he has to go through that drunken bout. And that haze has to lift, and he has to see these issues for what they really are. Hey, this is a guy who, up until the very last 30 seconds of the movie, you think may get Victor Laszlo killed so he can have the girl. I mean, today, that's probably how you would end the movie. We live in the age of the anti-hero today. And you think that till the very end of the movie, but that's not the moral thing to do. And eventually Rick realizes what's right. And then more improbably, I believe, Captain Renault realizes that there's a right thing to do, and it apparently includes going to Brazzaville to serve with some kind of free French anti-Axis resistance unit being formed. Brazzaville, of course, is not the Belgian Congo, the other Congo, the French Congo across the river. So I did like that. I mean, I do like films that represent a learning experience or a journey or an arc, I guess we may say, for the character. And Rick starts out; he's a great guy. He's obviously a famous saloon keeper. His past catches up with him with this woman. He responds to it by kind of going to pieces. Then he seems cruel. He's going to ruin her. He's going to ruin all their lives. I don't care if Victor gets killed. And at the very last second, he kind of he has that chance for redemption, and he seizes it. The fog lifts, and he realizes what's the right thing to do.
I mean, he is the ultimate jilted lover for sure. it's taken him 2 years to get over this woman, and he seemingly never, Ilsa, of course, and he seemingly never has. I mean, that's, I think, the reason that he's such a cynic, that he's such a, jerk in the first part of the movie, really, because he is. I mean, he doesn't, like as you said, he doesn't care about anything. He doesn't care about anybody. He cares about making a buck and watching out for Sam, because Sam's his buddy. And that's it. That's the only two people on the planet Earth that he seems to care about is Rick Blaine and Sam. And it's when she walks in that he starts that transformation, as you say, to a cruel person, and then becomes the ultimate, the ultimate hero. You look like you want to say something.
No, it's Bergman's fault. She's too tall. That's the thing that probably the anecdote that everyone knows about is she was taller than Bogey, and so
2 inches.
Wouldn't let her wear shoes or even have Bogey in sort of lift. So maybe it's he's short man syndrome.
There are those of us around this table who have had to stand on a box for filming here at the National World War II Museum, and I would be that person. So I completely empathize.
What do you think, Dave?
I think. The Rick Blaine character is someone, it might have been Bogey, said the first time anyone ever thought of me was as a romantic lead was when she looked at me that way, and that's all about the craft of the filmmaking, the way Ingrid Bergman was framed, her beauty, her purity, and that I think, and in the flashback scenes you see her in a. I think she thinks her husband's dead. She doesn't. She doesn't. Spoiler alert. She does.
What?
For everybody. Sorry.
It all makes sense.
But then in all the scenes in Rick's, all the scenes when she's in Casablanca, the way that she's framed and photographed is you sort of see in Rick what he lost, and I think that helps amplify the way he feels. That makes sense.
I will take a backseat to no one. My love and respect for Ingrid Bergman. She's a wonderful actress. I thought her character was underwritten in this. I mean, if there's one piece of underwriting, she just represents. You just said it, Dave. She represents purity. Mm-hmm. She's wearing white. She's beautiful. She's on ultimate close-ups. Her eyes are tearing. I never really got a sense of her as a human being in the way that I got a sense of Rick, for example, or even Renault, maybe in his own twisted way. But I know it's a film of the 1940s. But if you're looking for my purposes to critique this, that's something that pops up to me. I thought she was underwritten. She's a symbol.
Yeah, and some of that may be part of production lore. They were famously bringing pages of script up to the set as they were doing it. And I think I'm sure I've read that part of the lore of the film is that she didn't know how it was going to end.
Like, who do I love more?
Right. The actress did not know how to play to those actors in many cases, or at least wasn't sure. And that may, I'm sure it affected her performance.
That's interesting, though. I will agree with that. I've read that in a million places. It's always tough to track down this mythology. But she supposedly asked someone, who do I love more? Am I supposed to be in love more with Rick or Victor? Victor, he doesn't do much for me. I'm just another character who's a symbol. He's a freedom fighter. We don't know exactly what that means.
He's very wooden too. He
Yeah.
doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of personality to him. And I mean, I know what you're driving at. I agree with you, but I mean, he's just he's boring. He's a real boring guy. And Rick's a cool dude, man. He's
the coolest.
Like you said, he's slinging drinks and running guns. He's a bad dude, and then you got this guy.
And what did she see in him?
In Victor.
Right.
He's taller than
Well,
right.
Now, maybe we're into some Freudian areas here, but she didn't seem to have a husband-wife love for Victor as much as she was very young. He was already this important political freedom fighter. And I think at the end, you clearly see she does love Rick more.
Oh, yeah.
But I never thought, the romantic sparks. I don't think Victor kisses Ilsa on the lips in this film. I could be wrong, but certainly not as often as Rick does.
He's married to the cause. He's paladin.
And she loves the cause, and she's attracted to him because of the cause, more so than I think from some kind of romantic attraction.
When you talk about moral clarity, there's a lot of amoral characters in this movie. I mean, just about everybody at some point or another screws over somebody else, either figuratively or literally. In this movie, there's a lot of them. Reno being probably the worst of them all.
Scavengers everywhere. Scavengers.
Yeah.
Scavengers.
I love that.
Vultures.
That's right.
People are always reaching for their wallets in Casablanca.
and often finding them missing.
I also think the movie would have been 100,000% better if Peter Lorre had been in it for another solid hour. I like most cinephiles of a certain era. I love films of the 30s and 40s, and I've seen Peter Lorre in M as a mass murderer who is driven to kill children. He doesn't want to do it, as he says repeatedly. I don't want to do this, but I can't help it. He's a powerful actor. He's got a haunted look, and he's perfect. He's just, I think, absolutely perfect in this film, and the role is all too brief.
He's even better in Maltese Falcon.
Oh, yeah. We could do the filmography of Peter Lorre and leave a lot of good movies out. You're right.
Yep, he was a good one.
And back to this assemblage of characters, I was thinking as you were talking about Renault, he's the one who's got to police this populace of where everyone is dangerous, conceivably, and to each other all the time. And everybody's desperate. And I'm not like trying to load up on sympathy for Renault, but it was, and plus deal with the Germans and all of it. And
the Italians too. You get the
Right.
Italians in there too.
Oh no, my last name for everyone is Cittino, so I will say this: the Italian's the comic relief in Casablanca. The one Italian there, this is ridiculous. He's got a ridiculous uniform. He talks ridiculously. Why is the Italian always the comic relief in these films?
Mussolini, man.
Well, but yeah.
You talked about the cast of characters. Let's talk about the cast. This cast was, with the exception of 3 credited roles, the 3 credited roles, of course, one of them being Bogey, were Americans. The rest were Europeans.
30 nations represented in the cast. Many refugees from what was happening in Europe. And in fact, there was a colony of 1,500 European actors who populated and were big stars at home on stage or screen, but then they've got roles as extras as a pickpocket in Casablanca. The actor who plays the croupier was a film star in Europe, but his image from film posters was used in anti-Semitic Nazi propaganda back there. And so that I think informs a lot of the crowd scene dynamic in Casablanca, especially the sing-along. That hyper-emotional moment triggered by maybe the first sign of Rick having some sense of loyalty behind himself. It's a nod to the trumpet player to go ahead and play it. Anyway, that room is populated by people who had fled what this movie was about.
Yeah, the crying woman when the Marseillaise is sung, Madeleine LeBeau, Yvonne, she had escaped Europe through Lisbon. So very, very realistic along the lines of the plot of Casablanca. So I know there's talk about when the film is shot, or the scene is shot rather, about how the tears were very real, the emotions were very real, and whether that's true in every case, I don't know, but you certainly get the sense that it was, I don't know, it's emotional and powerful 70, 75 years later. So I can only imagine how it was watching it in the theater at the time, or being an actor or actress in it.
Well, from what I read specifically about Madeleine LeBeau, is that the tears that she's shedding in that scene, theirs are very real. Like, she really did lose it because she was very French, and as you said, she was a refugee. So when they did break out in the song, she was singing with all her heart, and she did really break down in that scene. She's not acting. She's really losing it there. And a little tidbit of trivia: she was the last one to pass away from the cast
in 2016, I think, very recently.
Yep.
If I could just give a shout out to the Marseillaise. We're talking about moral clarity. We have a nice national anthem. We reference our flag. The Marseillaise.
That's the best ever.
Yeah, it's the best anthem ever. It invokes blood-soaked fields, and the soldiers of the tyrant are killing your children, and it's really calling people to action. It's not a marching song. I mean, it was used as one, but it's not really a classic marching song in the way that Wacht am Rhein is, the song the Germans are singing. It's a military song about defending the Rhine. But man, the Marseillaise really lays it down. It's a fight of freedom versus tyranny. It's the people versus those who would oppress them, and it's very, very powerfully used in this film. Obviously, the visuals, but even if you know just a smattering of French, those visuals can really be augmented. And so I urge anyone out there, find a translation of the opening phrases of the Marseillaise. It's blood curdling, man. It really is.
It is. In my opinion, it's the most powerful scene in the whole flick. Because the volume of that crowd in that bar is. Because, the Germans start singing it, and they got a pretty good rhythm going, and they sound pretty good. They do. They got that typical German martial, musical tone to them. And then the French they just bust in, and they are loud, and they are clear, and they are just overpowering. It was very symbolic of the time. The United States was obviously siding with France in the war, and they were our allies. And there was a great sympathy for France after the fall of France in 1940, although we still didn't want to be involved. But it was you could feel it. You can, as you said, Colin, you can still feel it today when you see that one scene. It is really, really cool.
It was intentional and also a construct. One of the production notes was from the producer who said, "Let's not have those 6 guys on the bandstand playing this song. We'll have the full orchestra." And so it soars into the full soundtrack that sort of bolsters that feeling, that goosebump moment.
Tyranny will never last. We are kind of cynical about our own democracy today, and I think anybody who grows up and, you have sometimes less than 50% of the people even bother to drag themselves to the polls to vote, which is a right that, people have won at the risk of their lives over the centuries. But, I think we have to – you watch a film like Casablanca, you have to drop your cynicism for a moment. And, of course, that's what it's trying to get you to do is drop your cynicism. Exactly. That scene is real, and the scene is real because I think we all know in our heart of hearts that tyranny will never last. Nobody is going to be pushed around. Human beings are not going to be pushed around by a small minority for the long term. Oh, it may last for years, decades, maybe even longer than that, but it will always come crashing down. That's my firm belief, and it's why I like to watch a film like Casablanca. It reminds us that in World War II, it was almost impossible to be cynical about this struggle while it was happening. And who was the side that was able to enlist more people willing to risk their lives, like to go behind the lines and do daring do and exciting missions and espionage? The Allies had a 10 times advantage over the Axis powers. So I think, it's hard to get people to die. Let's die. Why? Well, we're going to die for Hitler's tyranny. But if you say you want to die for your own freedom and that of your children and your children's children, you're going to get people to do things, to risk their lives in ways that might seem absolutely fantastic in normal times.
Yeah. Well, let's discuss.
All right. I think I'm done.
You good?
Dr. Rob.
Loosen the collar there. Yeah. A little steam out of there. Well, let's talk about the evolution of the story from an unproduced play to one of the highest regarded films in history. Who wants to take the lead on that one?
The play had many of the pieces. It had Rick. It had the cafe. It had Sam. It had As Time Goes By. But the film became a separate creation. The Epstein brothers, I think, are primarily credited with most of the writing, but Koch and there was another writer brought on to do some of the romance pieces. And the evolution continued well beyond the script completion and beginning of filming because there were elements that were adjusted all the way up beyond the ending of the film. The final line of the film was actually written weeks after the scene was shot and written by the producer. The beginning of A Beautiful Friendship line was dubbed, well-known lore about Casablanca. And so the film itself was a product of Warner Brothers, famous for gangster movies primarily, one of 30-plus films that Warner's did. One of the things that I think sort of informs the
30-plus films that year.
That year, that's correct. And down from 50-plus, pre the Warriors. And, it was filmed from May to August of 42. And in a city that was sort of feeling under siege. There was a curfew. They had to be done by 6:30 to go home. There were blackouts.
This is on the set, right? This is Warner Brothers Studios.
Yeah.
So they're just on the studio set.
Yeah, and created entirely on the set. There was one exterior scene at Van Nuys Airport, but in one of the documentaries about the film that I saw, Steven Spielberg pointed out the fact that it had to be a set shot film actually helped it become more like theater. It was like there's more buy-in because of the artificiality and because they create this world in this place in Burbank that becomes the Casablanca of everybody's imagination. They couldn't film crowd scenes or chase scenes on location because of fear of upsetting the populace. The tops of the sound stages were camouflaged because of fear of Japanese attack on the West Coast. And so all of this was made, the film was made during this, and it was maybe the darkest time of the war for Americans. The post-Pearl, pre-Doolittle, the Doolittle date escapes me now. But,
April 18th, 42.
Yeah. So Doolittle had happened, but the pre-production was coming during like the darkest months of the war.
The war was still in doubt. There was definitely no.
Right.
This is made in the first.
preconceived
If you're in the
victory.
6-month window after Pearl Harbor, you're in bad times.
Yeah.
Even the Doolittle raid is a nice moment, but it's still American troops getting pushed around, and the Japanese are still on the rampage. So though, you just can't call the movie Burbank, Dave. I don't think it works.
No, you want to call it White House.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And it was a factory of the industrial. Of the industry of the city. Warner Brothers employed 70-plus writers, and the right ones ended up on this. All the craftspeople contributed greatly, I think. I think the film's really beautifully shot and the lighting is incredible. In fact, I want to recommend a documentary. It's on the internet. It was made for the 2012 DVD release. This is the one where Spielberg is interviewed, William Friedkin, the director, and it's available and also very enlightening in approaching how the different craftspeople built the look and feel of the film, including the script and including some of the performances. That's one of the sources that I would recommend to people who know this movie. And it sort of tells you why you like it that you hadn't realized, sort of the beyond the story elements of Casablanca.
Great soundtrack too. The movie has a great soundtrack. All the songs that are played in the movie are great. It's really cool. Just a little interesting tidbit there. My wife and I had toured the Warner Brothers studios way back in 2008, I think it was, and they'll take you through the different sound stages that are still there from the 20s and 30s. And on the outside of each soundstage, they have a plaque of all the classic movies that were filmed there. And one of the ones we went into was Casablanca, which was pretty damn cool, I thought. But it is certainly a beautiful movie. Well, this film is a part of popular culture, and it's referenced quite often, and from all kinds of different things. And let's talk about how that is and why.
I'm probably unusual around the table as I didn't see Casablanca till relatively late in my life, but I already knew it.
Yes.
I knew it from Bugs Bunny or The Simpsons or a million SNL sketches or The Usual Suspects or it's such common currency in American cinema and American movie making that just all the big tropes and characters, the dialogue, even some of the scenes and the dress and attire. It's so universal, and it's just such in the bloodstream of American cinema and entertainment that when I saw it, it's like, oh, I know this. It felt like I had already seen it, or already knew it. It was so familiar. But that just shows how important a film it is and how titanic a film it is, that it's sort of infused everywhere in sort of the post-Casablanca world. But yeah, I knew it from Looney Tunes cartoons and the alternate Casablanca ending on the episode of The Simpsons of the Bogey killing Hitler as he pops out of a piano, which check it out if you haven't seen that one. But no, it just shows you how important of a film it is and just how universal it is that everyone steals from it and everyone riffs from it.
I saw it in college, and my first thought was, oh, so this is where all the popular culture comes from.
Every single line.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other movies called Play It Against Sam. There are other movies called Here's Looking at You, Kid. So it is. This is a film that you can't escape. And I like what Colin just said. You've seen it, even if you haven't seen it. And when you see it, then there's a mark of instant recognition, which is what makes a pop classic. People see this for the first time and have Dave's exact reaction. Well, so that's what.
it kind of makes you feel good when you realize, oh, that's where that came from. It doesn't make you feel so stupid. It's like, oh, all right.
But it also, it's, I don't know, it's sort of, if you're familiar with, like Japanese cinema, you can start to see where, like Quentin Tarantino takes all of his things from. It's like, oh, okay, he stole it from this. But seeing, like Casablanca, it's like, oh, I can see where, this film noir, sort of took this scene or, this, puff of cigarette smoke or this use of shadow or light. It's like, oh, it's from Casablanca.
I was going to bring that up, is that it's not a film noir, but it kind of is.
Mm-hmm.
It's shot like a very early film noir. You mentioned the lighting, and it's very, parts of it are very darkly lit, and, there's the lights shining up and down, all different odd angles that it generally wouldn't in a regular Hollywood film. And it's a seedy movie set in a seedy location, and it is very film noir before that was a genre. That didn't really become a genre until after the war. But anyway, yeah.
Have they colorized this film?
Oh,
They
yeah.
have,
Oh,
yeah.
I haven't seen it.
That's a travesty,
Ted,
too.
Yeah.
Ted Turner did that.
Well,
Yeah.
says everything you need to say.
I think it was one of his releases. He colorized it for TBS.
Whenever you colorize a movie, it looks horrible. I've never seen a black and white movie that was colorized that looked good,
Yeah,
ever.
I don't know. I mean, look, you can do whatever you want. If you own the film, or you've got the copyright, do whatever you want. It was filmed this way for a reason.
That was for TV, and for me, in the theater, or watching the movie is about white, black, and gray, and so that was so wrong to think for TV audiences that a different colored dress would be better.
Yeah, I think they said it was like putting arms on the Venus de Milo. I think it's sort of reaction to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad to see we're all old school around here. We don't trust new technology. It's good.
It's like trying to colorize It's a Wonderful Life. You can't
Next
do
week,
that.
next week we'll have a podcast on the Luddites.
Well, one of the endearing characters in this film is played by an African American, which in 1942 was something that was rather rare, and it's Sam. It's Dooley Wilson again. Play it again, Sam. Which is actually never actually said in the movie, by the way. But he was not the first choice for that role, was he not?
Yeah, he wasn't. Quickly, they came to him, but there was a conversation early on about having the character be a female. He's based on a character that the playwright saw in Nice in a real bar that was populated by people who went to Rick's, and so in the early script, he was a black American. One of the interesting things about the film and Dooley Wilson and Humphrey Bogart, there were very few relationships between white and black men, friendship relationships like that. They were fishing buddies. They were, that was one thing that was remarked on, especially by the black press, the African American press at the time it was released. That portrayal of those two men was very unusual, and also, I think, also helps inform the Rick character. It tells you something about Rick and his relationship with Sam. Dooley Wilson, someone pointed out, was a drummer, did not play piano, sang like a beautiful thing, but actually toured with a group that played North Africa before his film career started. Played for T.E. Lawrence with the Red Devils, and then went on to a okay film career after Casablanca. So.
But I think that you read that there were other choices made. Ella Fitzgerald was considered for the role.
Yeah.
Lena Horne considered for the role. That's an alternate reality that I'd like to live in. I would love to see that film.
Different movie, or Ronald Reagan as Rick.
Oh my God!
Oh, really?
That was actually a fabrication by Warner Brothers. It was never actually truly considered. It was hyping a movie Reagan was in at that moment.
He was in the service at that point, wasn't he?
He got into the Army shortly after he made, I wrote down the film, but I can't think. It was with Ann Sheridan. And they put out a press release saying that Reagan and Ann Sheridan were going to be the leads of Casablanca at one point. It was never considered.
Always hearing who was considered for a role is fascinating. When you love a movie and you know the person really nailed the role, then you read the list of the 7 other people who read for the role or were considered for the role. It's always fascinating.
Nobody could be Rick but Bogey. There's nobody. Well, let's start to wrap this bad boy up. What is Rob? Do you like this movie and would you recommend it?
Oh well, I mean, it's whether I like Casablanca, it's almost irrelevant. Whether all the four of us around this table like this film is almost irrelevant because it's a world. I mean, it was a world-conquering film. We've already heard that people see it for the first time, and it's already familiar to them. And I think that is the highest compliment you can pay any piece of culture, especially popular culture, one that's just made inroad after inroad through television and music and other films and word of mouth and comedy sketches. So it's almost irrelevant. Having said that, yeah, of course I love the movie. But I really love the movie. At the end, it's time to put aside your personal life for the great struggle between good and evil that is now about to smother the entire earth in its embrace, and there's no one going to be able to escape it. And I think, for a movie that has some pretty cornball lines, problems of three little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. I mean, that's so bad. It's genius. Mm-hmm. That to me is completely corny. But for all the cornball nature of some of the dialogue, it's really, really got a serious message.
Absolutely, and I think it's the kind of film to me that grows richer the more you know about it and the more you know about how it was made. And so I'll recommend, in addition to recommending the film, some of the books about this film. There's a great big middle section about in Noah Eisenberg's book about the nature of the cast, the refugee nature of the cast, which was fascinating. We'll always have Casablanca, the legend and afterlife of Hollywood's most beloved film, and then also The Making of Casablanca, Bogart, Bergman, and World War II by Algene Harmitz, and then Meredith Hindley's book, which has the true history of that era, Destination Casablanca. Those are the references that I'd recommend.
Colin? No, it's great. I would recommend it for the same reason I recommend people, reading the Old Testament, despite their belief or lack thereof, just so to understand the references. The same reason I tell people to listen to Louis Armstrong or Sam Cooke, just to know where people are taking their riffs and cues from. It's just to have that common currency, to be able to speak that language, to know the history, like Dave said, of the film really, enlivens it and enriches it. But no, you don't need anything coming in. You can hit this film cold, and it'll hit you just as hard as it hit audiences back then. So no, it's great.
Yeah, you read liner notes are always great for a piece of music, but it's a different experience than just sitting down and listening to the album cold. And I think this movie works in any way you want to deal with it.
It's a movie that whenever it's on, I watch it, whether it's 5 minutes in or it's got 5 minutes left.
The Godfather standard. If The Godfather's on, I stop what I'm doing, and then 3 hours I'm lost.
This is one of the few Hollywood movies that I would say that will forever live on. People 30 years from now, 40, 50 years from now are still going to sit down and watch this movie, and it's still going to be just as effective. It's going to be just as powerful. It's going to be just as beautiful as it is now. It's a fantastic movie. It's a classic. I mean, when you think of classic movies of the Hollywood era, I think of two. This one and The Wizard of Oz. I mean, they're great movies for totally different reasons, but they're fantastic movies. They're classics. So, yeah, absolutely, I'd recommend this movie, and absolutely, I like it. I love it. Rob, you got any final thoughts?
No, not much. I think I've said my piece. I think this is a very moral film.
Dave?
I love the transition, the journey from cynicism through romanticism to commitment. To that transformation is one of the things I love about the film.
Colin?
Yeah, it's one of the most romantic pieces of propaganda you'll ever encounter. But no, it's a treasure. It's one for the time capsule for sure.
Absolutely. And I'll just close with this, Louis. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.
Nice.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to hear more about the events we discussed today, listen to our mini episode next week where we will share oral histories from those, well, maybe, who were refugees from Europe in World War II. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Service on Celluloid. Be sure to rate and review us on iTunes if you like what you hear. I'd like to thank everyone who made this podcast possible, our producer, Tessa Jager, and our sound engineer, Jeremy Burson. This has been a production of the National World War II Museum.